afternoon.
Wonder Twin Powers. All right, Dr. Cashman, we are ready.
All right, let's see, 1 second. Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order at 12:04 p.m. Shelley, can we get a roll call, please?
All right, Amber Rice. Brian Smith.
Here.
Chester Key. Franco Castaburin.
Here.
Garth Gamer.
Present.
Heather Miller. Let's see. Don't hear Heather. Let me check the chat area. Let's see, Paul Dabrowski. Jason Johnson.
Here.
Jason Payne. Josh Gaither.
Here.
Matt Shaw.
Present.
Neil Gago.
Present.
Paul Dabrowski. I saw you on the chat. Shari Brand.
Heather Miller's here too. Sorry about that.
Oh, thank you.
And Shari Brand.
Shari Brand. Great, we do have quorum. I do have a question for Heather. Are you with is Chester Key with you?
Chester's not with me this morning, no.
Okay.
Or this afternoon, sorry.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
We do. All right, we have quorum.
Okay, a couple of opening announcements and housekeeping items. Number one, on the Google teleconference, if you put your mouse at the bottom part of the screen, the buttons to turn on and off video, as well as to mute and unmute your audio, are located there. Attendees are advised that this is a public meeting. It's being recorded and will be posted to the ADHS website. So anything that you say verbally, anything that's viewed on the webcam, or anything that's typed in the chat box will become part of the record and will be posted. Please mute your microphone when not speaking. Excuse me. If attending by phone only, *6 is your unmute command. Shelley will be displaying the materials for the group, so there's no need to present or screen share. Shelley and Julia will be monitoring the chat box for any questions. And for everyone's benefit, please clearly identify yourself before stating your remarks. Let's go on to the chairman's report, please. The attendance report is attachment 3A. Any questions on those? Just a gentle reminder that if you miss 2 consecutive meetings, the Bureau will contact you to ask if you're still interested in serving on the committee. At this time, we are showing no new vacancies and we have no new members to introduce. Any questions on the attendance report? Okay, hearing none. The second item in the chairman's report is that the T3Gs, the newly approved drug profiles, as well as Table 1 EMCT drug box updates are posted to the web for your review. Next item, Bureau report, EMS for Children.
Franco, this is Gail. I just wanted to briefly say I wanted to put a big thank you to this entire committee. There was a doggone amount of work that went into producing all of these documents between the T3Gs, the drug profile updates, and updating Table 1. So the Bureau really would like to put a thank you to this entire committee for all the work they put into those documents. I think it is a huge improvement for all of EMS in Arizona. So thank you for all your work.
Yeah, and thank you for your leadership on all those projects, Gail. Appreciate it.
Okay, for EMS for Children report, not a ton going on. We did complete our national EMS for Children data collection at the end of March. And so we did recently receive our data report back from NADARC. So just a quick overview of that. We had 101 numbers 101 agencies participate in that survey. And in terms of performance measure 2, pediatric emergency care coordinator, 37 agencies indicated that they do have a pediatric emergency care coordinator. And then 28 out of 101, or 27.7%, indicated that they met the EMS for Children performance measure use of pediatric specific equipment. If you're interested in more explanation or detail on that report, you can reach out to me and I would be happy to share that with you. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. Excuse me. Item 5, we will discuss and review the action items. 5A, you'll see the attachment on the screen. Can I get a motion to review and approve the PMD minutes from March 19th, 2020?
So moved, Brian.
Second.
Second, Jason.
Okay, so we have a motion from Brian Smith, a second from Jason Johnson. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions? Okay, the ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. The next item is to discuss, amend, and approve the updated Table 5.1 Arizona Scope of Practice, which is attachment 5B1, and then the supporting document 5B2. Can I get a motion to discuss?
Motion to discuss.
Name, please.
Sorry.
Charlie, thank you.
Second, Brian.
Okay. Gail, did you want to comment on the background for this document?
Yes, thank you very much. So I just wanted to give a little bit of historical background on some of this. The scope of practice is part of rule, and because of that, we have been given the opportunity to potentially look at updating the scope of practice. The Bureau wanted to bring recommended changes to this committee for input, and then this would then go on to EMS Council and MDC in September for their input as well. One of the things that we noted in going through this, the national scope of practice went through kind of a mid-year update, and so kind of in between when they typically do their updates. The other thing that we noted was that Doug Crunk was a huge help in reviewing these. There were a number of items that were still listed as STRs on our Arizona scope of practice because we had not updated rule, but they had already actually been covered in the transition that was done many years ago. So what we did was try to align the format to match the national scope of practice so that the wording matched, the order and kind of breakdown matched, and then also went through and said, okay, are there any things that we have just sometimes different wording? So endotracheal intubation, we just reworded that to match the national format as well. So that is a little bit of background. So what we wanted to do to make it a little bit more clear for this committee was we have a clean version, and then we have the old version that Shelley very kindly produced that has kind of the strike throughs in terms of how we rename things, move things, and go along those lines. So the clean version, which is being projected currently, at the top, I can give a little bit of historical background. When we see the first STR, which is under airway-supraglottic for EMT. So Arizona, I think a lot of agencies in Arizona have instituted a supraglottic as a STR. And this is currently a STR in Arizona. The national scope made mention that while they recognized several parts of the country were utilizing supraglottic airways for EMTs, they weren't ready to put that in the national scope. So they discussed it, but they did not add that in as a routine part of national scope. So that would need to remain a STR. One of the big changes that is in the national scope is when you look at Cpap. Cpap is now being recommended in national scope for all levels from EMT through paramedic. It's currently in Arizona within paramedic scope of practice. So we would potentially need to create a bridge transition program or training for EMT through EMT eyes for that. So that is just kind of wanting to point out that piece. The next one down is,
Bradley,
yes.
would it be appropriate for me to make a comment on that line item or wait until we get back into it? Because
No,
I have a comment about the
you can-
EMT.
You can certainly make a comment now, Brian, absolutely.
Okay, so when you read the 2019 national scope of practice model, in kind of inherent in the way that document is put together is that there is medical oversight of EMTs, which is not necessarily true in many places in Arizona. By adding that as a check mark at the EMT level makes it a basic life support scope of practice under the and that's a statutory issue, versus an STR where it would be supplemental training, but it requires medical direction to do that. So I just want to know that by putting a check mark in there, that makes it a basic life support skill, and under the statutes wouldn't require medical direction.
That is a great pickup, and I think that is one where we could consider keeping, at least for the EMT level, a STR instead of a check mark. Would that be your suggestion?
Well, I'm not real keen on having lots and lots of STRs at the EMT level, but that would be, I mean, if the consideration is to move that way, then unless people are really good with EMTs performing Cpap in Arizona without having any medical direction, I think you'd have to put it in as an STR.
And I think that was one of the things we discussed internally, and figured you would maybe have a good viewpoint on that one. So I think the new version of this document, we have significantly decreased the number of STRs. So it wouldn't be a substantial number. So I think if that gets around the concern, which I think is a very valid concern, of having a Cpap as a scope of practice without having medical direction oversight. So I think that would be a reasonable one to put STR under the EMT box.
It's Josh Gaither. If I can ask a question, is there any way to quantify the number of BLS agencies only that do not have medical direction? That seems like a very small minority of agencies would fall into that category.
Almost every place in our area doesn't have medical direction at the EMT level. Only for advanced life support providers.
Right. So, Brian, do you have agencies that are BLS only then?
No, they have EMTs, but their contracts are only providing medical direction for ALS providers.
So not to get too sidetracked, but I would recommend you reevaluate that for your liability coverage. Clearly, BLS and ALS providers work together to manage patients. And as a medical director, I certainly assume the liability of my BLS providers by providing medical direction for my ALS providers also. I would be strongly in favor of including Cpap in the BLS scope of practice. I think it has minimal risk and obviously significant upside as a way to optimize oxygenation and ventilation for providers who can't perform advanced airway management.
And this is Heather Miller up in Kingman. I have quite a few BLS agencies that we do provide medical direction for to help out that don't have ALS for pretty lengthy periods of time until either a helicopter gets there or an ambulance shows up within an hour out. So this is my 2 cents.
So this is Gail. One of the things that we did discuss when you look at Cpap, it would be a piece of equipment that an agency would need to purchase. So even if though it is disposable for the most part, it is new equipment. And I feel pretty comfortable that most agencies, if they are purchasing equipment, would train the personnel on how to use that equipment. Maybe that's a Pollyanna view of the world, but I do think because it is equipment specific, that there is that layer of protection as well, just something to consider.
It's
And
Daniel
the-
Spice. Quick question. When we're talking about CPAP, are you guys including high flow nasal cannula in the CPAP discussion, or is that distinct?
That is distinct per national scope, and we'll get to that one. So just kind of to get a better feel from the group, would the group lean towards, for EMTs, that it be a STR or a check mark with a bridge transition training needed?
It's Josh Gaither. I like checkmark.
Josh, this is Franco. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
One other agency detail to pick up is there are some private entities, for example, the Honeywell factory up here in Scottsdale, where they have a core of BLS providers that operate without medical direction. So there's some sort of a private corporate entities that may do that around the state as well. Any other comments on the CPAP, BLS versus STR? Shelley, would you suggest that we handle this as a separate vote, or any other suggestion?
We could do a roll call, like get everyone's opinion to get consensus.
Okay. Dr. Bradley, are you comfortable with that as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Can we get a roll call then, specifically on the amendment to change CPAP? I guess we'll phrase it as all in favor of maintaining CPAP as a checkmark skill with a bridge training. Say aye by roll call.
I'll start with Amber Rice.
Aye.
Brian Smith.
Aye.
Let's see, Franco Castromarin.
Aye.
Garth Gamer.
Aye.
Heather Miller.
Aye.
Jason Johnson. Jason, let's see, Josh Gaither.
Aye.
Matt Shaw.
Aye.
Neil Gajo. Neil, are you still on the call? Paul
Yes.
Dabrowski? Oh, Neil, what was your... Neil, do you support checkmark for CPAP?
Yes.
Paul Dabrowski? Might need you to type in the chat box again. And Shari Brand?
Aye.
Majority is aye. CPAP checkmark.
All right, I'll make another comment, Gail, since we're diving into the content of the document. I was going to ask if it would be reasonable just for organization to add endotracheal intubation show it as airway hyphen endotracheal intubation so that it's grouped up above with the other three airway products.
The only reason we didn't was we tried to match the national exactly, just for ease of comparison, because we had a very different order compared to the national scope previously.
Okay.
So that's the only reason it's listed kind of that way. We tried to match identically to the national scope. So when the national scope does update, it's easier for us to track and for any educators to track as well.
Understood. Thanks.
Hi, it's Brian again.
Go ahead, Brian.
So, when this was originally worked on in 2009 to meet up with a 2007 scope of practice model, and we developed all this check mark box idea because it had never been like this before, and we used the NASIMSO gap analysis draft at the time, and the work group that worked on the gap analysis for Arizona. And one of there were actually two precipitating factors around the use of the term STR. And one of them was to, in a way, reduce the paramedic scope of practice, because there were a couple of programs, large programs in Arizona that did not want to have to teach some of those items as a part of their program, and therefore they were made STRs rather than check marks in Arizona. And then as a result of that, the STR worked in for those things, particularly in the EMT scope, where they were rules to allow IV starts and combi tubes and things like that helped resolve that issue also. So if you look at chest tube placement, assist only, and monitoring and management, those were in the national scope of practice in 2007. In Arizona, those were made STRs so that they did not have to be instructed. And so even today, those don't have to be instructed. So I'm not sure that they really were included in the Bridger, because at the time the Bridger were done, it wasn't to make up in this particular instance. It was not designed to make up for an interim thing, because both of those items were in the 2007 scope. So there may be programs that we're still not teaching those because they were still listed as STR in the state of Arizona. So now they're check marks. So it may be appropriate, if we want to do that, to switch to that, to put them down as a 1, so that it actually does require, it would require then everybody to make sure, if they hadn't done a Bridger before, that they would do that.
So there's a comment from Doug Crunk saying they were included in every bridge that I know was taught.
Gail?
Yes.
So that was part of the transition material that every paramedic in the state would have had to have gone through that. That's why we took the STR designation off of that in our discussions.
And I'm certainly not the expert on that piece. I will leave that discussion up to everyone else. I think what we really tried to say is, if something's in national scope, unless it's a new ad, especially if we're going back as far as 2007 or 2009, that we kind of included it this way to match. Any further discussion on those before we kind of move down a little bit? For cricothyrotomy, that previously we had broken down into 3 different types that were all paramedic, and STR for EMTIs. We combined them to a single just cric line to match national scope, and left it as a check mark for paramedics. And then we took out the STR for I-99s. The rationale for that, just to give a little background, we did a search. There are currently 13 certified I-99s in the state of Arizona. 6 of them have an agency associated with them. They're from different agencies kind of throughout, but we felt the recommendation to bring to this group was that that is a procedure that is pretty technical, and that really it's so rarely performed in the pre-hospital setting that this should be done by a paramedic. So just that is one for disclosure. We wanted to make sure the group recognized we would be taking STR away from the EMT eyes for that, which is again 13 in Arizona. All right, hearing no comments, I'll keep going down the list. Next is end-tidal CO2 monitoring and interpretation of waveform capnography. So this is another one that the national scope mentioned, that they recognize that from the EMT level up, many parts of the country were allowing EMTs to do this. In Arizona, due to the EPIC TBI project, at least at the time of that rollout, the vast majority of EMCTs across Arizona were trained in end-tidal CO2 monitoring and interpretation. However, not anyone who's a new grad from an EMT program since that project was performed would not necessarily have had that training. So we are recommending that for EMTs that remain a STR, for AEMTs and EMTs, they would need a bridge transition. So that would just be, we do have the educational module that was put together a while ago. So if we add that as an STR with the bridge, we have that educational module prepared to be available to anyone. Moving further down, oxygen therapy, to Dr. Steit's question, high flow nasal cannula. This is one that is specified as a separate entity, separate from Cpap, per the national scope of practice. This is one that is now in the national scope for paramedics, and this would need a transition training if we included this in the Arizona scope of practice. That is the other kind of one in parentheses. If you go to the next page, skill cardioversion circulation, we did a little bit of cleanup on this section. Some of the changes would be that we previously had single lead and multiple lead. Now it's simply listed as 12 lead acquisition and transmission and 12 lead interpretive. So it's more of a cleanup of that piece of it. The next section, which is skills, splinting, SMR, and patient restraint. This was getting rid of all the previous spinal immobilization terminology and matching it to read SMR, spinal motion restriction. Page 2 into page 3, the top of page 3, this was a request that was previously approved by PMD and MDC for the request to do IM epinephrine for anaphylaxis. And we recognized after going through that whole approval process that it wasn't in the scope of practice, so we had kind of approved something that could not be implemented. We have gotten a lot of requests once summer hit from some of the more rural parts of Arizona asking where that was in terms of the approval process. So this SDR for EMTs for IM would be to allow an agencies to potentially, again, they would need a medical director to do this because it's the STR, so they would need a medical director to do IM for epinephrine. So that's why that would be there. A little further down under medical director approved medications, this is a newly kind of formatted to match the national version as well. Highlighted in yellow, the top one. One of the things that we wanted to discuss, the national scope has removed any mention of patient assisted, and their rationale for this makes sense because I personally never understood how you were going to assist a patient. You're either just giving their patient their own medication or you're not. So you're not really assisting them. You're not holding their hand as you do that. So the discussion in the national scope was that really it was confusing to the practitioner and also confusing to educators. So that was their recommendation to get rid of the patient assisted. So when we look at this as the auto injector, when you think of anaphylaxis, this is one of those entities that is truly a life-saving intervention. So if a patient has their own auto injector and they're not comfortable or too incapacitated to administer this, would we allow EMTs to administer the auto injector? My vote is to take away, currently it lists supplied and carried by the EMS agency, and I would just say, my thought would be to just word this as use of epinephrine auto injector for anaphylaxis, period. So I wanted to get a little bit of discussion on that.
Gail, I just had a question. It's Shari. So
Yes.
we're making intramuscular, pretty much intramuscular. Was that for Epi? Was that the original indication, or was it just intramuscular injections? Because I'm a little confused if we're using auto injectors or who's supplying the Epi, because it would have to be medical director controlled if we're letting EMT even on an STR give it.
So it's a little confusing. If you can scroll up a little bit more, just so we can see the top of this page, Shelley, I can kind of show you. So intramuscular is broken up as intramuscular and then intramuscular dash auto injector. Auto injector is within scope for EMTs. The request that we had gotten from some of the rural parts of Arizona was that we had a STR for IM where you draw up a medication. And that's where separately, when we get further down in the document, you'll see specific where it says epinephrine for anaphylaxis prepared kit. So it has to be covered in kind of two different sections to make sure they can, one, give the medication, and then two, have the skill of procedure. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, I'm just missing where the epinephrine for.
It's near the end. We'll get to that one.
Okay.
Yes.
That was the confusion.
Yeah, so this is kind of specific to the auto injector piece of it. So previously you could use an auto injector if it was supplied by the EMS agency. So this would be.
So now it's either way.
So that our recommendation would be to say basically use of epinephrine auto injector for anaphylaxis period and take out supplied and carried by EMS agency.
Okay.
This is Franco. I would support removal of the wording in order for this line to cover an auto injector either supplied by the patient or the agency.
Thank you. Scrolling down a little bit further, so the very last line on page 3, thrombolytics. In the national scope, thrombolytics are taught as part of the national scope of practice. My feeling was that this should be a STR just because this is such a high-risk intervention and medication. So that would be our recommendation to keep this as a STR in Arizona, which it currently is. But I wanted to make sure that this group at least considered that and knew that in the national scope, it is allowed.
And sorry, I would keep it as an STR. I would just give it to them.
Sorry, I heard Shari. Was that someone else who spoke after Shari?
Sorry, Josh Gaither, I agree also. STR.
Thanks, Josh. And Dr. Dabrowski, I saw your comment regarding auto injectors. Thank you. All right, next page. This one we wanted to discuss a little bit. So under skill IV initiation / maintenance of fluids, the national scope does not have IV access as a skill for EMTs. It has been a STR in Arizona. We wanted to bring that one up for discussion to see what the group's thoughts were on that. My thought is if you aren't able to give anything through the IV, what is the benefit of accessing or doing the IV? But I wanted to at least bring that up and have the group kind of weigh in on that piece.
This is Brian. I agree with that sentiment.
All right, so I heard one agreement to get rid of STR for IV access. Anyone else agree or disagree with that?
This is Matt Shaw. I agree.
Looks like Franco agrees as well.
Sorry.
Gamer, agree.
All right, and Dr. Dabrowski as well. Thank you, Dr. Gamer and Dr. Dabrowski.
And I agree, Gail. Sorry.
Thank you. All right, and then if we keep scrolling down a little bit further to the Arizona specific skills, this is one that's a little bit tricky, but we have a few things that are still in Arizona that are not in the national scope. So the national scope, they took out automated transport ventilator for AEMTs. So that has been in ours as a STR for AEMTs. So if we would like to continue that, we would need to keep that as a STR. It's currently an STR for EMTs and for AEMTs. So the question is, do we feel that EMTs should use an automated transport ventilator or not, is question number one. And question number two, should we keep it as a STR for AEMTs?
Please note the comment from Doug Crunk as well.
And I think, Doug, was your comment in regards to IV access along the border?
Yes, they use it a great deal down there for dehydrated patients they're picking up in the desert.
What are they infusing through the IV that they're not allowed to use?
Pardon me?
I said, what are they infusing through the IV that they're not allowed to use?
What did I miss?
Well, EMTs can't infuse, they can't infuse IV fluids or medication. So they can start an IV, so they could put a saline lock in, but they can't actually do anything with it.
All right, I'll have to think about that for a minute because I know they're hanging normal saline on those patients.
My guess is that they're federal and they operate under a different practice. That's been our experience up at the park as well, at the Grand Canyon.
That would make more sense then. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. So for back to the automated transport ventilator, should we keep that as a STR for EMTs or not? And then as well for AEMTs?
This is Matt Shaw again. I would say I would lean towards making it an STR for both EMT and AEMT. I think there's plenty of literature showing that bagging patients is typically not very good for them. And so there's lots of very simple automated transport ventilators that EMTs or AMTs could use probably to much better effect than bagging.
And kind of along the rationale, if you have the equipment, you're probably training people on the equipment.
Yeah, correct.
So your vote would be to keep STR for automated transport ventilators for EMT and AEMTs?
Correct.
This is Gamer. I would like to speak in support of that as well, especially if EMT or basic agencies are going to be transporting COVID patients from here to there and everywhere. I just think it increases the options for that sort of traffic to occur.
All right, thank you. Next, Arizona one, BiPAP has been scope of practice for paramedic. I think there's only a handful or less agencies within Arizona that have BiPAP. It's not listed in the national scope, which is why we can't have it combined with Cpap if we're trying to keep the formatting the same. So that's why it's in a separate table. Intubation nasotracheal, that was actually taken out of the national scope. It is not in there. I don't know when that change occurred. I know there's a handful of medics from the agencies that I work with that tend to use this and be very proficient at this skill. So I'm hesitant to take it away, but wanted to get the group's thought on that as well.
This is Gamer. I concur with you, Gail. Same here at Phoenix.
Thank you.
I just want to verify, are we changing BiPAP or it's just in a different section?
Just in a different section.
Okay.
Yep. Yes, it's because it's not listed in the national scope. Part of the rationale of trying to match this is that I won't tell you how many hours I spent trying to cross-check line by line and figure out where we were different from the national scope, just because we had things worded differently or in different sections. So that's why it's separated out.
Hey, Gail, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, my phone, I couldn't get it to unmute. I just had a quick question. I know it's going back to the IV access. Are we still saying that EMTs can still put in an IV just to do an IV start? Or are we taking that skill away?
So the way it is listed, this is an actual skill. So this is for initiating IV access.
Okay. Are we keeping it? Because my big concern is we have a lot of EMT medic crews, and we usually will have medics getting other things set up, the EMT starting the IV that the medic will continue to use. So that's how we're using them up here, is our EMTs start lines all day, every day for their paramedics. So, and I agree they're not running fluids through it, but we would still need that STR so they could start the IV to assist the medics with their patients.
Hi, it's Brian. So on the normal saline is on the EMT list and on the table 1. So that technically means they could run fluids.
Right, and that's what I remember seeing on there too. Is it's actually an approved medication for EMTs is to give normal saline.
Yeah. So if the Border Patrol, I still have the same sentiment, but just to clarify, normal saline isn't on the drug box list, so that means they would be able to flow fluid.
Right, and that's kind of my thought for keeping it in, because I know, like I said, we use it all the time for our EMTs just to start lines to help the medics, so that the medics can be moving on to something else. But then also they can start the normal saline just hanging a bag, because it's within their scope of practice right now, and as well as within their approved medication.
So I think it is, it's a little bit tricky, and this is where sometimes going back and forth to figure out what's what. In the current version in Arizona, EMTs can maintain non-medicated IV fluids or capped. So maintenance, but not necessarily initiation, but it sounds like that's being interpreted because it's different in the drug table. So I think this is where sometimes we have some confusion with how scope. So it definitely sounds like it's being interpreted different parts of Arizona. So we would probably need to re-vote on that piece. Maybe we'll just finish going down the rest of this section and then go back and finish the IV discussion vote, if that's okay with you guys. Next one for STR, medication-assisted intubation or paralytic. So this refers to RSI, so recommending keeping that as an STR. And then this is where we have kind of that goofy to cover intramuscular, including epi only for anaphylaxis STR. So this goes back to kind of making sure we have it covered in a couple different sections to allow for EMTs to do draw up and administer epi for anaphylaxis.
Dr. Bradley, there's a chat note from Dr. Castro-Marin about trademark issue on BiPAP.
Yes, caught that. We will change that to BPAP. The next two refers to table 3 and infusion pumps. This is just what allows our paramedics and EMTIs to essentially do the interfacility work, so we're not changing anything with that. And then the next line is Epi Anaphylaxis Prepared Kit. This is where there's a little bit of overlap in terms of we're kind of covering it like 4 different sections, which might be overkill. Brian, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this because you're much better with this piece of it. This is allowing, and what we had previously approved in PMD and MBC, for an EMT to have a kit to draw up that their agency put together to draw up their own epinephrine to administer for anaphylaxis if they could not purchase a prepackaged one. So it would be within scope for AMTs up. The question is, do we need to have both versions of it listed?
So you have, because we had a starting point where we had this planned how this was going to go in here, but I don't have access to it. So we have intramuscular, including epi for anaphylaxis. So does that mean they can do other kinds of things intramuscularly there then? And then we have the Epi Anaphylaxis Prepared Kit.
So
what is the double stars for? What does the double star mean?
Double star describes the epi, how it is to be carried.
In a prepared?
Yep.
Okay. Then.
So Gail, this is Amber. So the way it's written, I was just thinking of things like naloxone, since we have more and more basic providers doing the naloxone, but only intranasally. Would this at all cover intramuscular administration of naloxone for EMTs?
So that is a good question. Let me double check that. So we had naloxone covered.
Oh, and it's only intranasal at the EMT level.
Yeah, but I'm thinking that due to the cost of it, I don't know if some agencies would be interested in having like prepared kits or other ways of administering. If we're including epinephrine as IM as a basic skill, would we consider adding naloxone as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question. That's probably as we're doing this is really, we haven't had a chance to update this in a long time. So I think if we feel like that's something we want to include and push forward to EMS Council and MDC, I think that's a very good discussion and pick up. So would you recommend?
So we should take off the Epi Anaphylaxis Prepared Kit line. Because it's really, it doesn't, for all the other levels that's included in the scope of practice. So what kind of preparation they have isn't an issue. By having intramuscular, including epi only for anaphylaxis, I guess we could put, add naloxone in there somehow. And then we already have the double stars that refer to the prepared kit up at the top. So I think that the Epi Anaphylaxis Prepared Kit line is redundant.
Okay. So if we get rid of that one for intramuscular for the STR for EMTs, would we say including epi, or should we say including naloxone and epinephrine only for anaphylaxis? Would that accomplish what we're trying to do?
Then do I guess there are some pre-filled syringes for naloxone available, but I guess that doesn't necessarily matter if they're drawing up a vial of naloxone. It's not necessarily in a prepared kit like those kits that were brought to us as a part of the demonstration to put that in, but maybe that doesn't matter. And I guess the other thing too is the word including epi, seems like we should put epinephrine for anaphylaxis, and then if we wanted to add naloxone for opiate overdoses, so that it's only specifically for those two, not including anything else. And then in the double star, we could add whatever we wanted to do naloxone, we could put that up on the same line with the double stars with the epinephrine kits.
Okay. So you'd recommend intramuscular, in parentheses, naloxone for opioid overdose and epinephrine for anaphylaxis.
Yes.
Okay, I like that. And then we'll get rid of Epi Anaphylaxis Prepared Kit at the bottom. And the double star would refer back to the concentration of epinephrine. And I don't think we need to even specify anything with naloxone unless the group feels otherwise.
Does anyone feel in the group that there should be a specific dose, or that at the state level we should be sort of shoehorning EMT administration to a specific dose and concentration, or not, or just leave that up to the individual medical directors?
Dr. Castro-Marin, this is Terry. I have more of a question, a general question. As I listen to the discussion, it seems to me that we're actually talking about two separate skills that we're trying to combine into a single activity. The ability to administer medication intramuscularly is one skill, and the second skill is the ability to appropriately and accurately draw up medications. So I'm just confused about whether or not we have identified and approved EMTs for the skill of appropriately and accurately drawing up medications. Is that handled separately?
Your point is well made, Terry. I'm also questioning the second skill of you be able to identify a concentrated medication, draw up the correct dose prior to administration. I'm also asking myself the same question there.
But isn't, if you authorize a medication, it seems like, because we're authorizing a medication, and as a part of that is the 5 or 6 rights or 8 rights I've seen recently, that's a part of the medication administration which we're authorizing, which is that process. It seems like to me that becomes one process when you authorize the medication, that you have whatever rights you are looking at, whether it's the right dose and so on, is all inherent in how you draw it up.
I think, Brian, that comes more into play as there's more varieties of a single medication available, right? I don't know that was really in the spirit, for example, when EMTs were allowed to give a nitroglycerin spray or assist with an aspirin. I mean, if those are pretty limited, you're not having to rifle through a bunch of different vials to pick out which aspirin dose is the correct dose. You know what I'm saying?
Well, but that's part of the issue of making these kinds of moves to add that in there. We don't have that kind of separate listing at the paramedic level, do we? That's just becomes inherent in the fact that we're administering medications, and when we authorize those medications, the process becomes that becomes all part of the process that's inherent in administering any kind of drug.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that I just want to make sure that the rest of the committee understands that, is that I see it the way you do, that if we're going to make it an approved issue, then what we're asking, to Terry's point, is not only the mechanical skill, the physical, the psychomotor skill of administering the drug intramuscularly, but also that at that point, said EMT is going to need to own all of the skills of identifying the drug, identifying the concentration, the right dose, the right indication, et cetera.
So Franco, this is Amber. So I'm just thinking naloxone specifically. I mean, I don't know if they would even have any preparations that would exceed any recommended dose swabs for naloxone. Like, I don't think anyone's carrying like a multi-dose vial or such like that. So I do agree with your point. I'm just wondering if there's, for these two medications specifically that we're talking about, is there a preparation or a concentration which would even be carried that would allow for some kind of overdose?
So this is Gail. Just to kind of briefly, I think if you look at the very first page at the top of the kind of key, we describe specifically what version of epinephrine they would need to use for the prepared kit if they were using a non-auto-injector form. So one of the things to keep in mind with this is I think we debated at length a couple of years ago when this was first brought forward, but part of making it an STR means that you have to have a medical director for the EMT level that's going to approve you utilizing this, which means that your medical director is responsible for making sure that you are safely doing this. We do have the curriculum that was prepared and approved through the education committee that essentially has just been on hold pending this being approved in scope of practice. So just to give a little bit of context about that, I do feel that at the top of at the key of this, we do describe specifically with the epinephrine how it would need to be carried. And you would have to have a medical director that approves your training as well.
Dr. Bradley, yeah, thank you. That alleviates my concern, Ms. Terry.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just add if I can add my 2 cents. I mean, if you're doing it as an STR, you should be doing the psychomotor portion of it anyway. I mean, that's part of what we inherently do with the paramedics when they have, I mean, that's the station they actually have to pass. So if we're letting them do that procedure, I think it'd be incumbent upon the medical director to make sure that they're passing that in full as far as that portion of it, no matter what drug they're pulling up, that they have to be able to figure that portion out and be proficient in it.
All right, so it sounds like the consensus is that the group seems comfortable moving forward with these two specific medications, and so it sounds like we'd keep the medication specific, but with the spirit that once it's put into an STR skill for the EMT level, it is the intent is that the psychomotor as well as the cognitive skills of as Brian Smith put it, the 5 rights or 6 rights of medication administration are all part of that skill.
All right, thank you for summarizing that, Franco. So the last one, this is a request that we'd like to put forward for the group to consider, is as everything has come forward with COVID, there's been a lot of requests to utilize EMS to obtain swabs for diagnostic testing. And so the national scope is also talking about this quite a bit. They just have not actually opened up national scope to do this. So we are recommending that at all levels, it be a STR to collect nasal/pharyngeal swab for diagnostic testing. Thank you, Franco, for helping to make this very generic wording. We don't want to kind of make it more specific as only nasal or only pharyngeal or just viral specific. So we wanted to put this out there as a consideration as a new skill STR for all 4 levels. Any concerns about that? Hearing none. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Oh. So if we're using it in the terms of, I mean, I guess we can always revisit it, because I know they're coming out with some oral stuff too, and I have no idea the sensitivities or specificities, or if that would be something in the future. Do we want it? I mean, are we limiting it to nasopharyngeal, or do you want to throw oral in?
I kind of think simple, that if you can do pharyngeal, you go through the mouth to get there.
Okay, it's on the way. I can work with that. For interpretation, that works.
Gail, it's Catheter. I am wondering why this needs to be part of the permanent scope of practice. As you all know, we have crisis standards of care, and would this be something that is better suited for a expanded scope of practice during a crisis. I'm a little worried about the long-term implications of adding this. For example, do we want our providers to do flu swabs? Do we want our providers to do routine childhood screening for RSV? Where do you draw the line on this particular skill?
Definitely a good point. Agencies currently can implement viral testing as part of the expanded scope with the rule waivers. Our thought in putting this in here is that this is almost guaranteed to be added to the national scope. And so because we have not had the opportunity to update scope of practice in many years, we're kind of considering including that now and knowing that this is likely to be included in the national scope. So just kind of something to consider. We would be adding it as the STR, so you would have to have a medical director who approves you doing that type of testing. So it would not be a blanket check mark. But I think your points are well made.
So Gail, this is Amber. I think while I'm not entirely opposed to adding it, my big concern is similar to Josh's, in that I'm worried that it will increase pressure on EMS agencies to perform these things. So we've been able to, in discussions, I know that Josh has been in many more than I, but in discussions with the city council and, all these other governmental, very non-medical entities, putting pressure on EMS agencies to perform some of these duties, and having it not specifically be in the scope of practice has been a sort of more convenient out to be able to say, we just can't do that. And it's not because it wouldn't be useful in some capacity, but there is, especially now, a lot of pressure on EMS agencies from people who are not medically trained whatsoever to do some of these things. So that's my only comment.
This is certainly this group's recommendation to include or not to include. We are the Department of Health, so we tend to advocate for overall health-related activities. But certainly, this is our ask for PMD is to kind of consider all of our recommended changes and certainly to approve or not approve any of them. So we'll definitely leave that up to this group.
Well, what if you just did it as an STR instead of a checkbox, and then it's up to the individual medical director whether or not they want to approve that for their agencies?
Yeah, it is proposed as a STR for all levels.
Okay. It does seem like, though, by adding it, though, does have the potential to add pressure if that's an issue, because now everybody knows it's on there and it's available to them. So I understand that adds a potential level of element from certain individuals. I guess my question ultimately would be, at least for Arizona, has this been an issue to not be able to find people to do this, at least with our current testing level? I don't know if there's ultimately is there ability that we're really going to have tons more tests, that this would become an issue or not?
There are parts of Arizona that have contacted ADHS to get approval to utilize EMS to do this. So yes,
Okay.
there are several agencies within Arizona that have contacted us to be able to do this.
Okay.
Gail, let me comment on that a little bit. I know of only one from Southern Arizona that has done that, and that was purely done because it was convenient for them, not because of a testing or lack of ability to test. It was done out of convenience, no other reason.
Gail, this is Dr. Gamer. Can I speak in favor of this? I think that it's a happy medium to have it at STR all across the board, and I think that we may encounter a time where we want to test our own folks And if we don't have it in there at all, then I think that might hamstring us in the future. And that's all I want to say about this. I'm in favor of keeping it as an STR across the board.
This is Jason. I agree with Garth. I'm the same way. If it was a check mark, I wouldn't like it. But as an STR, it gives the medical director the ability to say, no, we're not going to do this. Or say, yeah, we do need it in our individual area. And then also, if it's going towards, that's what's going to be on the national scope, we're just kind of a little bit ahead of the game.
Gail, this is Neil. I can tell you from my personal experience over the last couple of weeks, I've gotten several emails, one from Mojave County, and I believe the other was from Coconino, looking for anybody and everybody, including EMS providers, to assist with COVID-19 testing at testing sites for 4 to 8 weeks. So I'm leaning along with everybody else. If we leave it as an STR in a situation like we currently have, it gives our EMS providers the ability to do it, but our medical directors say, no, you're not.
Thank you for your comments. So it sounds like we probably need to revisit the IV discussion and then take a vote on the whether or not to include STR for the swabs for diagnostic testing. So Shelley, if you could perhaps do kind of a roll call similar to what you did previously, just to see where the votes fall for this viral swab testing.
Okay.
Dr. Bradley, I have one other quick question on the timing of this. Does the Bureau have approval to change the scope of practice yet? Or this rule? Does the Bureau have the authorization to change this rule?
Yes.
So this is exempt rulemaking. So technically, this could go through in 30 to 60 days. Probably not much faster.
Probably not that quickly, Brian.
Okay.
This is Terry. I think we will have to. It's going to take longer than that, simply because we have so many other rulemaking processes underway. But we do have authority from both the governor's office and the department to move forward.
Okay. And then I have so this first one is just going to be to resolve this issue, right? Because I will have one other small technical.
Yes. We first want to just get a kind of a roll call vote on the diagnostic testing swabs. We need to revisit the discussion on IV access, I think, before we do our final vote. So there'll be another opportunity after the IV access for your other point, Brian.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna, if you agree with how the collect nasal pharyngeal swab for diagnostic testing appears with the STR at all levels, say aye. Amber Rice?
I'm gonna say no.
Brian Smith?
Aye.
Franco Castroman?
Aye.
Garth Gamer?
Aye.
Heather Miller?
Aye.
Jason Johnson?
Aye.
Joshua Gaither?
No.
Matt Shaw?
Aye.
Neil Gayko?
Aye.
I think Paul is no longer in the meeting. Sherry Brand?
Aye.
Majority supports. Yeah, we've got 8 with ayes and then 1, 2 with noes. Majority supports keeping it as is.
All right. Back to the intravenous access, kind of, if you can scroll up a little bit on page 4. So I think we had voted to remove the STR, and then we kind of circled back a little bit of discussion. That sounds like there might be more consideration to keep this as a STR. This is not a
if I could just speak, if I could, as Jason, if I can speak in behalf of it, how we use it here is we rarely have 2 medics on any ambulance. It's usually a medic and an EMT. So our EMTs start the IV and let the medic continue it. And if it's and we have several agencies that are BLS only, and what they do is an ALS intercept. So as they're transporting, they put the IV in so that as soon as they get the ALS intercept, they're not waiting to put in the IV, that they can start giving medications right away. So that's why I would speak in favor of keeping it.
This is site. We also do very similar things throughout the state with AMR.
Shelley, can we go ahead and proceed with the roll call?
All right. If you agree with keeping a STR for the EMT level for intravenous access, say aye. Amber Rice?
Aye.
Brian Smith? Brian, do you?
Sorry, I was on mute while I was thinking there, and I didn't know. Aye, I'll say aye.
Okay, that's for keeping the STR for the EMT level for intravenous access.
Yes.
Franco Castamorin?
In light of the fact that the saline is approved, I have to say, I'm compelled to say aye.
All right, Garth Gamer?
Aye.
Heather Miller?
Aye.
Jason Johnson?
Aye, and thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Josh
Only for you,
Gaither?
Jason.
Aye.
Matt Shaw?
Aye.
Neil Gago?
Aye.
And Shari Brand?
Aye.
That was a slam dunk to keep it as it appears on the screen there.
And Ben, I just had a question. So kind of like what Franco said, in light of the normal saline being used, do we need to add an STR where it says intravenous maintenance of non-medicated IV fluids? Since there already is a normal saline is already approved for the EMTs.
Let's see, that would be on this table here under, would it be on the medication table or on this table?
It's right under where we just approved it under where it's the STR IV access. It's 2 boxes down.
Oh yeah, so the question is, would we add that as an STR as well?
Correct.
For consistency, I would. It seems like it would have to be yes.
That's kind of my thought.
Anybody opposed to that? Does that make sense for everyone?
Could you rephrase that again, please?
So the question is, in order to maintain consistency with what we just voted on with STR for IV access, as well as in light of the fact that normal saline infusion is permitted on table, what is it, 5.3, 5.2? Then here on this table, 2 boxes down from the IV access box, would it be appropriate to add STR to intravenous maintenance of non-medicated IV fluids under EMT?
But that wouldn't be maintenance. That would be administration.
Okay, so yeah.
I think just because of the way we've kind of worked things out in Arizona with Table 1 drug box list is that if we with NS we have an A there, that means it's an administration versus an M for maintenance or monitoring or something like that. I think we use monitoring. Let me get that list back up here again.
Yeah, I only see a designation for A, authorized to administer the agent.
Right. And so I think that covers us because that's the way we've made stuff work with our drug box list in Arizona.
Okay. So A, it means administer as well as implies maintenance and monitoring.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to quickly summarize the changes and then just a time check. We are at 119. Yes.
Dr. This is James Cunningham. I'm sorry for the interruption. With the automated transport ventilator, I wasn't entirely clear. Was this going to be an EMT STR or was it going to be a check mark?
EMT STR.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. All right, so I will quickly run down from the top of page 1. So for Cpap, we are going to add this to scope of practice for EMT, AEMT, and EMTIs with the need for a bridge transition. Untitled CO2 monitoring and interpretation of waveform capnography. This will be a STR with a bridge transition for
Dr.
EMTs.
Bradley?
Yes.
That was my other kind of technical change. If we add something to the scope of practice of one of these with a check mark, it should be a bridger. At some point in time, everybody is going to have to do that. But because we've made this an STR, it doesn't mean that everybody has to bridge to this. That's based off of medical direction. So I think the one should get scratched off there.
Okay, so for Cpap or Untitled or both?
Entitled CO2, because we've made Cpap a check mark, so the EMT level would need to bridge. But if it's an STR, that's optional.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you for catching that. Down further, oxygen high flow nasal cannula, that would be a check mark for paramedics with a bridge. On page 3, under medical director approved medications, use of epinephrine auto-injector for anaphylaxis, period. On page 4, at the top, for intravenous access, EMTs will have STR. Under Arizona specific skills, automated transport ventilator will be STR for EMT. BiPAP will be changed to BPAP. And intramuscular will state intramuscular naloxone for opioid overdose and epinephrine for anaphylaxis. And we will scratch the Epi Anaphylaxis Prepared Kit line. Did I capture all of our recommended changes?
So actually, I guess another question has popped up in my brain now. Currently, Foley catheters are an STR, I believe. Do we know how many? Because we still have some people in our area who occasionally do that skill. And my question, I guess, is: are we aware if other people in the state are doing that or not before we don't add that? Keep that in the list as an STR.
So this was taken out of the national scope. It is really one of the big quality metrics in the hospital is catheter-associated urinary tract infections.
Right.
That I think when you look at the sterility in the pre-hospital environment of an indwelling Foley catheter and placing that, the likelihood of that being a highly sterile procedure is pretty low. With it not being in the national scope, that was our rationale for not including it any longer in Arizona.
Okay, I don't have anything.
Any further comments after Gail's summary? Okay, can I have a motion
Sorry,
to?
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Matt. Can I ask you a question about the high flow nasal cannula?
Of course.
So we decided that it was going to be a check mark with a bridger required. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And so is that bridger then going to be, how is that bridger intended to be done? Is that through paramedic programs and refreshers, or is that something that like the education committee would come up with a training to then put out?
So the education committee can certainly put together a training to put out. Those trainings are always optional. Individual training
Sure.
programs and refreshers could create their own training on that as well.
Okay. And if an individual agency wanted to do it, they would need to create their own training.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Can I have a motion to approve this?
One
yes.
other quick question. Sorry, it's Josh Gaither. Historically, or at least for the past 5 or 6 years, we have gone through this and made individual motions to change things or adopt things on this table. Is that not going to be the way that we're going to modify scope of practice anymore? And I ask because it seems like we are making an incredible number of changes. I, for one, have not gotten stakeholder feedback from my region. I obviously the track changes version was in the packet that was sent out. I was just a little surprised there were this many changes. Is this going to be in place then for the next 5 to 10 years without being modified?
So Josh, maybe I didn't clarify the process at the beginning. So all the votes that we previously did in committee, none of those took effect over the last several years. So that was one of the things that we recognized, is that multiple committees over the years voted on things, but we didn't have any technically right to vote on them because this was kind of stuck in rule and it wasn't open for change. And it was very dated. Things that people had already been in transition, we had transitioned all of the EMCTs over, were still listed as STRs. This process of us making recommendations to approve or not approve does not change rule writing. It still has to go through the process with public comment. So I apologize if I did not make that clear. This is just kind of, we wanted to get PMD's views on this because this committee is generally who approves skills and procedures, but this absolutely still needs to go to the stakeholder community for feedback. So it would still go through
It would also go to Medical Direction Commission.
And EMS Council.
Okay.
So does that make you see? Yeah, I apologize. I definitely was not clear about that at the beginning. This still needs to go through the typical process. So I apologize for not making that more clear.
Can I have a motion to go ahead and approve the changes as summarized by Dr. Bradley on this new table 5.1 Arizona scope of practice skills?
Brian, so moved.
Brian Smith.
Matt Shaw, second.
Matt Shaw with the second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Anyone abstaining?
Josh Gaither, I abstain.
One abstention with Dr. Gaither. The result of the votes are that the ayes have it and the motion passes. The next item, back up to it here, is to discuss, amend, and approve adding high flow nasal cannula. So this is a moot at this point, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So then the last item today is to refer to attachment 5D, discuss bylaws, review, and roster roles.
This is Gail. I know we're shorter in time, so I will kind of be brief in the discussion. What we are trying to do, the statutory committees roster is controlled by statute. The standing committees, we have a little bit more flexibility because we are currently updating the bylaws. We do have the flexibility of updating the roster. This is not an action item today, but we wanted to start the discussion and then make it an action item for the next meeting. One of the things that we've discovered in the TTTG process, as well as the Table 1 update, was that we have a toxicologist on MDC, but not as a part of PMD. And we've utilized the services of toxicologists quite a bit in some of the work that we've done. And so we wanted to put forward to this group to recommend potentially adding a toxicologist to the roster. One of the issues is that would take us to an even number of individuals on the roster, which would potentially be an issue if we have a tie in a vote. That would be the one downfall, but I didn't necessarily see any other positions to remove. We have the liaisons from the 3 councils, EMS Council, STAB, and MDC, and then we have the other kind of representatives, and then 2 from each region. So it's a pretty well distributed membership currently, but if we added a toxicologist, which we wanted to put forward for consideration, we would technically have an even number. I think things tend to either be a fully approved or not with this group. So just wanted to bring that up for consideration.
I'll just make a comment for the record that there's a typographical error in position 1. The trauma surgeon representative is Paul Dabrowski.
Yes, we did get that. Thank you.
Sorry, Paul. It was me, my fault.
Any comments specifically? I just for the record, I'm not as concerned about the even number of folks as far as a tie breaking. I'm not sure if there's a tie breaking option in the bylaws specifically, but that might be one thing to consider. But otherwise, I would support adding a toxicologist for certain. Hearing no further comments, this is not an action item then, Dr. Gale, is that right?
Correct. Yes, this is just for discussion and to get the group's support to move forward.
Okay. Any agenda items for the next meeting? I will put forward a call to the public. All right, so upcoming events calendar, November 17th and 18th, the Pediatric Care After Resuscitation course will now be held online due to COVID-19 pandemic circumstances. Please visit the Bureau's News and Conferences page for any upcoming events, as well as CE opportunities. The next meeting will be November 19th, 2020 at 1200 hours, either online, I'm sure, or at DHS, depending on local conditions. And otherwise, I will move to adjourn. Can I get a second?
Second. This is Matt.
Matt, thank you. And the meeting will be adjourned at 13:31. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.